We have a couple of other comments here that I wanted to get to. These all came in from anonymous reader mails submitted through the Tumblr. We're going to be changing the way we do listener mail when we relaunch the site, but for now, this is what we've got. If a large corporation wanted to make an investment and start an ASIC farm, they could potentially take over the network. Is there any reality to switching to Scrypt? Would that solve anything? Would it bring new problems? Thanks.
Switching to Scrypt would certainly solve things temporarily. I don't think it's a permanent fix because while it does squash the difference between ASICs, FPGAs, GPU miners, and CPU miners, it will also lead to additional development to overcome that difference and more specialized hardware. While Scrypt will definitely kind of shore up this problem for a couple of years, what we should be thinking about is a more flexible way of having possibly multiple different proof-of-work algorithms or the ability to change proof-of-work algorithm as certain proof-of-work algorithms prove to be essentially too easy to game and centralize in such a way that really does not represent a healthy environment for Bitcoin. So yeah, Scrypt would definitely solve the problem. And I think, the nice thing about this is if there is a free market here, the free market exists in the sense that if we continue down this road of centralization and there's capture of centers of mining, people will vote with their wallets and leave en masse for Litecoin or another coin that has a proof-of-work algorithm that works better. So I'm not worried in the long term about cryptocurrency survival. However, I do think that this is certainly one of the core weaknesses of Bitcoin.
Just to clarify, when this person is talking about switching to Scrypt, does he mean just people starting to use Litecoins instead of Bitcoins, or does he mean actually changing something about Bitcoin itself to make it run on Scrypt algorithm? Because that seems like it would be very difficult to do technically.
Technically, it's not difficult at all to do, Stephanie, but the infrastructure is there. So essentially, those kinds of changes would require a hard fork. And usually the way something like that would be introduced is to say something like this. For the next version of the client, there's going to be a switch in it, and it's going to say, if the block is less than, 280,000 block height, then we're going to accept any blocks that are mined through a proof-of-work algorithm double SHA. If it's over 280,000 block height, then the client will only accept blocks that are mined using Scrypt. And so you have a specific point in time, based on the block height, that the cutoff occurs. And you gradually phase out old clients before that cutoff occurs. Otherwise, those clients are not able to do mining. And end users wouldn't need to change anything. Only miners would need to change. This has happened before. We've done hard forks like this before, planned as well as somewhat unplanned. So it's totally possible to change the proof of work in Bitcoin. And I think, as Dan Kaminsky said, it's going to be inevitable.
Possible is very different from likely, though. And that's kind of the key of the issue and the thing that makes it interesting to look into Bitcoin's future and see where we're going with this whole ASIC thing. Yes, you're right. Miners could absolutely start switching to Scrypt, but miners who have made a significant investment into ASIC hardware have all kinds of reasons to not do this. We're in a situation right now where there are at least 3 ASIC pre-orders that are floating around. Butterfly Labs is not the least of them. And all told, you've got somewhere in the range of 30 to 50,000 units that essentially have to go out to people before we even know what the total network hash is going to be at some kind of equilibrium. And that's not anticipated to happen until beginning of next year. I think this is an issue. And I think that you're going to find a lot of reticence from the community as a whole to this simply because so many people are still waiting for their ASICs. I don't know how we fix this, but yeah, if we could fix it, and again, I'm not sure that Scrypt is necessarily the solution here because it has a lot of these problems too. If a guy wanted to, the thing to focus on for improving the future for cryptocurrencies broadly moving forward would be in figuring out an algorithm that was as efficient as possible on a piece of hardware that is so widely spread, anybody who wants to simply opt into the system and start using it can without having to purchase anything new. If we can figure that out, this is a system where instead of incentivizing the people who are the most committed, instead you incentivize everyone. Because money isn't about the people who are most committed. Money is about everyone. Everyone uses money because it's a natural form of commerce. The incentives are so screwed up right now because of this pre-order thing. Imagine if instead of ASICs being pre-ordered, ASICs were brought to market and then sold. And instead of having to wait a year for getting your ASIC or wait 6 months or 3 months for getting your ASIC, it was just you ordered it and then 2 weeks later you had it. I mean, we wouldn't have any of this reticence. There wouldn't be any problem with it whatsoever because people would have their equipment. They would be profiting from it at a time that actually makes sense relative to their investment. And so moving forward, they'd be able to look at the situation, at least from a somewhat clear perspective, and say, okay, well, this makes sense. That makes sense. But because we have this, you invest in front and then you get the payoff way at some point in the future and nobody really knows when that's going to be. It's a very, very stressful thing, I think.
I don't really think that having more availability of ASICs would substantially solve this problem because you still have multiple orders of magnitude difference in range of hashing power. From a 14 nanometer to a 28 nanometer to a 48 nanometer or to a regular GPU, FPGA, or CPU. The range is simply too great. And having a range that is that great invites centralization. And centralization is very negative for Bitcoin. So I'm really concerned about an opposite scenario, which is if Bitcoin simply becomes the developed world's currency because only those who can afford ASICs can participate, then essentially it becomes a niche currency and people will walk. And one of the potential dangers from that, if we don't fix this early enough, the mining difficulty will keep climbing. And if people walk at a point where the mining difficulty is very, very high and can only be supported by distributed ASICs, you might find yourself in a very similar situation to Terracoin, where it takes months to mine the next block, not 10 minutes, and the entire network grinds to a halt. If the difficulty overshoots the network hashing capacity and people drop out, that's a real danger. I think that's the primary failure mode from a technology perspective for Bitcoin.
So another one of these emails, I think you should compare mining more to gold mining. Quote, I shouldn't be allowed to use a geologist or a rock crusher or a metal detector or a sluice just because some drunk down the road spends all his gold that he finds from panning on booze instead of investing it in more sophisticated equipment. This is an interesting question, but I think that it is a little bit too narrow. So to expand it a little bit, I think that, yes, you can do that, but only if the guy further upstream can set up a full industrial scale mining system that completely cleans out the stream downstream to you that you had previously been hoping to profit from. So yes, you have all this new equipment, but someone else has just obsoleted your new equipment with his new equipment, and because there's a fixed amount that is released at any given time, that is to your detriment directly rather than as some sort of, with gold mining, the differentiation is that it's like all the gold mines in the world are connected to each other at the center of the earth, and if you pull, gold out in India, it also comes out of Montana. There's less gold in Montana to find. So, I mean, that's the problem here, is that there's always a bigger player, and the game itself incentivizes players to come in and be as big as possible, because by being as big as possible, you maximize your return. And it's a more efficient process if you can control 20% of the network than if you can control 21% of the network.
So I think the gold analogy is pretty instructive, because in gold you don't have a method that is 100,000 or a million times more efficient than another method. And if you did have such a method, then instantly gold production would centralize in any location where that method was applicable or available, and then it would be controlled. So essentially you would have massive control over gold production. I think that's already happened in some ways, in that it's actually gold production is very centralized at the moment to, a few mines in South Africa and a few other places. And as a result, that leads to essentially trading on derivatives of gold that don't have physical gold attached to them because of the distribution problem. But if you suddenly had a method that was a million times more efficient, what it would do is it would completely imbalance the production of gold and tank the price. We've seen this happen with aluminum. When a method for extracting aluminum was developed that was literally a million times more efficient, it permanently disrupted the production of aluminum from everywhere. But the difference is we're not using that as our currency. So it doesn't matter if that commodity suddenly gets more expensive or changes, because the people who are extracting aluminum and selling it don't determine the rules by which extracted aluminum reaches the market. If they did, then they would instantly turn it into a monopoly. They would instantly prevent any other competition, and they would change the rules to suit them. So the problem is that this encourages the kind of market where you have complete market failure, because you have so much sudden centralization, and then you hand the rule control over to the people who have the ASICs, and good luck with that.
There's another thing about gold mining too, which is that gold mining doesn't have a difficulty. Like, for instance, if somebody develops a really efficient method of gold mining, or a bunch of gold miners jump into mining at the same time, the difficulty of mining gold doesn't change. There's always just so much gold in the earth. But that's not true with Bitcoin, because the greater the hashing power of the network, the more difficult the network adjusts to become, so that it does become more difficult to do the mining. So there's another difference there.
Mining is a terrible metaphor. It really doesn't encompass at all the process of minting new Bitcoin. And all it does is it creates this false analogy where people tend to draw conclusions based on physical systems that have no relationship to Bitcoin mining. So I think the term mining itself is extremely bad and misleading.
If I showed you a website where you could easily purchase electronics from the world's largest distributor with Bitcoins at 0% markup, would you think it was too good to be true? Good news. It's real, and it's at bitcoinstore.com. Choose from 500,000 items, save money over Amazon and Newegg, and convert your Bitcoins to real-world items. You can even buy with privacy. All they need is a shipping address. But don't take my word for it. See for yourself at bitcoinstore.com.